Yeah, it's not. Hey guys, this is Sarbjeet coming to you from Fremont. We just came back from Dell Tech World, and I have Dave Vellante with me, the original gangster of the analysts, and uh, he's well entrenched in tech for 3+ decades, and I highly respect his opinion. And he happens to talk to so many experts. From all these different vendors all over the industry. But particularly this time, he spoke to so many Dell execs and or their customers as well. I think Lowe's was on stage as well, and a few
Right.
others. I want to pick your brain, um, um, Dave, about what did you see there? What were your key sort of observations? Let's start there, and we can dig in, double click into some areas.
I mean, the first thing, Sarbjeet, was the event itself. You were there, and I was actually surprised and impressed at how many people showed up. I mean, I thought it would be 5,000, maybe 6,000. I would say it was closer to 8,000. And then when you add in the peripheral attendees that weren't registered for the event, were just hanging out having business meetings, I would say it was closer to 8,500. So that was pretty impressive. And there was a palpable enthusiasm for being back, live, face to face. Most of the people there that I talked to, this was their first trip in 2 years, and so that was pretty cool. I think the second thing is this is the first public meetup that Dell has had since the VMware spin, and I was very curious as to see what that messaging would look like and what's next. When Dell acquired EMC and by default VMware, they got VMware's revenue and profitability on their income statement. So their gross margins went from 19% up to low 30s. Wow, wow, awesome! They were in heaven. They
Yep.
spun the company out. Now their gross margins are back down to 20%. They basically spun out their most prized software asset. Now it's off the income statement, and so that I think exposes Dell to the fact that okay, they are overly weighted toward hardware. I think Wall Street looks at that and says, okay, we'd like to see more software content. And I think what we heard at the event was a roadmap for just that, with Project Apex as a service, with this Project Alpine, which is essentially an early instantiation of what I call, and John Furrier calls super cloud.
Yep.
Um, and then we saw the Snowflake announcement, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. And there are a lot of questions I still have about that, but it's still a sign that Dell is a major distribution channel for ISVs. And that's a new dynamic that I want to talk to you about in the industry.
Yeah, I think we will talk more at the industry level and just wrap up the Dell side of announcements up front, and then go into the like where the industry is going. I think that's more interesting conversation to be had. Um, my read was that Dell is going backing into software. Being with the software vendor, which was VMware, right? Having them as part of the company, now spinning them off and cleaning the balance sheet, which by the way they did that in very timely manner. A lot of debt was paid off because they got rid of that asset, and debt is going to become more expensive as rates go up. So that's a side discussion, more like a financial side of things. But let's focus on a little bit tech. So I think they're backing into software, right? So I believe that when VMware was like a spun out, the some of the talent from VMware kind of stayed with Dell, right? Because Dell, and if you noticed at the event, the the logo colors and all that stuff, they looked like VMware. I felt like I'm at the VM world. But like I look at the logo, I said, "Oh no, no!" And I had to read the text. Like I thought it was the VMware booth. So that the spirit of VMware, some parties left into the Dell, well, Dell company now at this point, Dell Tech. I think they want to leverage that, and it's natural. And on top of that, the whole world is moving to the cloud, and people are talking about multi-cloud, having single control planes, and Dell doesn't want to be left out, especially with the HPE's Green Lake initiative, which they started a couple of years before Dell is taking a stab at this. I think it's a bluntly but hard thing to pull off. To be honest with you, software takes a while to make. And that's why there are more margins. We talk about margin, by the way. It's a funny story, that funny sort of thing, that in software margins are high, but you spend a lot of money upfront in software, right? So that's why the margins are high, and then you get to milk the software for a long time to come. So yeah, those are my couple of observations. We will get deeper into the Apex and some other announcements. If you want, we can go there.
Yeah, I just, if I may comment on what you said, when Dell owned VMware, they bought EMC. The ecosystem never liked the fact that EMC owned VMware and didn't like the fact that Dell, I mean, Dell's competitors didn't like that.
Yeah.
But you know who loved it is the customers. They loved that integration. They loved having that, single throat to choke, pat to back to pad. Even though it was two separate companies, that integration was very clear on the roadmaps. So I was always a fan of a spin in. I thought that that would have been a better approach for customers, certainly not as lucrative for Michael Dell and Silver Lake. Um, and then the other, to your other point, it's very hard for a hardware company to become a software company. I do think there are opportunities for Dell, certainly through M&A, security, data management, so maybe some organic development. And I pushed Jeff Clark on this pretty hard, actually, in
Mhm.
private meetings. And he's laying out a vision for this, what I call the super cloud, that layer on top of, the hyperscalers on-prem, the edge. And I pushed him pretty hard on, do you really have the engineering resources and the chops to do this? And he said, yeah, I have the resources to do it. We can fund this without, dialing down the stock buybacks. And so, we'll see. I, I want to. I think there are opportunities there that, like you said, are going to be very challenging for them to fund. Um, that's assuming they can see them.
Yeah, I think money is one part. Like you can throw, even if you had unlimited amount of money, right? Just getting the team in place, the and then plans and how you want to build it and what tools you pick and all. It takes a while to build software. I mean, I've done that at different companies, built software. It takes a while to build it. Um, I think time will tell, but I think that they have what this is how I have summarized in one sentence. The Dell has taken the right steps in to right direction, three, four right steps into the right direction, and the journey has begun actually. So that's how I see it. It will take a while before we see good, fruitful sort of infrastructure as code kind of APIs coming out of Dell, and they actually are focusing on the storage side first. Um, that's their strength, right? And then I think they have to cover the compute. They they haven't talked about the network at all. These are the three main pillars, right? But when I was walking the floor of the expo, we were given a tour, analysts and media, in the morning, 8 o'clock when thing was not open. So um, I was able to talk to some experts there. Uh, all they were showing were like VxRail. It was more like VMware kind of solutions. By the way, they also showcased the Apex. Uh, Sort of software, walk through the whole UI, how you will procure stuff, and how you can change the size and what sport levels you can pick and all that. So stuff. So I think they want to make it simple. And just the one outcome from the whole effort, Apex effort, even that one outcome is huge. If you can make the procurement of Dell portfolio of products simple, that goes a long way, because I think that's why customers liked VMware and Dell being together, because they have one throat to choke, or one party to go to, less contracts and fewer sort of moving parts and less legal sort of involvement in every um, contract you write. There's legal involved and CFO involved, and it just creates friction, right? So I think by having all Dell portfolio products under one umbrella, procurement through that, I think that goes a long way. And the next thing is the APIs, then infrastructure as code. I think that is the path they need to take.
I would have, excellent points, by the way, and you're right on. It does takes a long time. That's a reasonable sequence that you just laid out. I would have liked to have seen offerings like Apex and GreenLake, and I've said this because I think this is table stakes. I mean, to me, these as a service, offerings from hardware vendors are meh. They're not great innovation. Had they
Hmm.
started this 2 years before Outposts, that
Yeah.
would have been more palpable to me. It's instead of 2 years afterwards, because they had to figure out so many things. Is billing. Now they're slowly rolling in services. It's their cloud. They're building out their own cloud, and the cloud has so many dimensions to it. So they're starting with some basic services, as is HPE with GreenLake and others, and we're starting to see the ecosystem develop. The thing that's clear from being at the event is that Dell at 100+ billion has such a massive distribution channel. They actually have leverage in the industry. The old days, Subject, this, hardware vendors would run to the ISVs and say, hey, I got a new box and it runs faster than the old box, and your software runs faster on my box than any other box out there. They say, okay, great, let's do something. We'll do a press release. Now it's somewhat flipped, right? A company like Dell can work with a company like Snowflake, give them access to their customer base. We could talk about what the implications are of that. My point is, Dell has the capability to build out that ecosystem. It doesn't happen overnight, but they have that fundamental dynamic in place where they have a lot of leverage because of their size.
Yeah, I think that matters a lot. I was sort of thinking about this stuff. I think a lot about this stuff, like how things are sort of shaping up, and which vendors have what kind of clout with customers, and do they have the right sort of scale as well. And then what I have boiled down this whole thing to is like the innovation favors scale, right? And that's how the system is laid out, right? So if you can produce a lot of stuff at scale, even if your margins are low, you end up making a lot of money, right? So you pick any business, Amazon's e-commerce business, like very low margin, high volume, right? Um, and,
Negative money.
and no, that's negative because of the EVs, right? So bets actually every pivot has a dip. I think that's a fact in life and individual for us individuals. Like if you want to change the career path, you know, you were a doctor, now you want to be engineer, there'll be a dip of income. Like if you go to medical school for 7 8 years, um, and these companies, hardware companies going to software, there can be dip as well, right? So I think they were Amazon was going to EVs, there's dip. um, yeah, so coming back to it, I think the scale versus where the hardware plays and the software, putting software aside for a moment, I think hardware is leaning towards a scale. So that's, if you look at Intel, Nvidia, AMD, the chips they're making the chips which are made for hyperscalers most of the time. It seems like it. Like earlier, we were sort of configuring our software, or optimizing software for hardware. I did some work with Intel recently, and then it just the light bulb sort of went off or on, whatever we say that, however we say that. I had a epiphany moment, like, oh my god, this it's flipping. So earlier we optimized software to run productively, if you will, on certain hardware, because hardware is kind of fixed, horizontal. Now there are chips being made which fit certain kind of workloads, right? Oh, this is for inference, this is for training, this is for normal database workloads. This is like, and there's some generic chips as well. So Intel is staying in the generic area for the time being right now. So less no DPU talk there, or TPUs and all the new PUs, right, if you will,
Yeah,
right?
XP. What?
Yeah, XPUs, the different terms that different companies use, and GPU, of course, we know who dominates in that area. So I think coming back to sort of trying to tie back into the enterprise side of things, I think that is a trend which leaves the enterprises in kind of a cold, if you will. Like who will innovate for companies which don't have the hyperscale kind of scale, right? Can we even do that? Or will the whole inertia of hardware companies making hardware for hyperscalers push everybody into the cloud, like force them to be there? Otherwise, you can't have the performance in-house as an enterprise Fortune 1000 companies. Let's put it that way. Like, lower you go, harder the problem is, right? So it will the Intel be left to do chips for enterprise only kind of thing. uh, and Dell, coming back to Dell has close sort of ties with Intel, and you saw that it was the big presence there, two big booths. I think Dell's sort of whole scale and the market share, it puts them into a certain advantage as compared to their competitors like SPE and others, right? We
Definitely.
know who they are, and I think they can leverage that strength and go into this software defined infrastructure uh, gradually, with the fear in my mind that they may collide with their partners, VMware, Red Hat, and others on that front. Like, if they're going to sell software as a service on top of AWS, and that's what they said, right? AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, it puts them into different sort of bucket. It's kind of a little edgy story.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dell is really all about scale, of course, as you say. So they've got, obviously supply chain emphasis and very strong cost structure. Jen Felch, their CIO, talked about their essentially, not her words, mine, their internal cloud. They're not going to public cloud migration, obviously.
Yeah,
They're modernizing their internal systems. Having said all that, AWS's operating margin is 15 points higher last quarter than Dell's gross margin. So there's a difference between cost and price. So AWS is setting a price umbrella. I think that's a real opportunity for the likes of Dell. And to your point,
yeah,
relative to HPE and Lenovo, I think Dell's got substantial advantages. Now, I would say this: Cisco is a competitor of sorts, of course, to Dell, and Cisco's got a highly differentiated strategy. Much more software content. Obviously, the leader in networking, Dell really doesn't have a great presence in networking. And then Oracle's the other one that has a
yeah,
highly differentiated strategy. I don't even think Dell anymore thinks about Oracle as a competitor. But what Oracle did with engineered systems and its own cloud and the bundling of all that stuff, it took it for the most part, it took Dell out of that market. Other than the fact that we had Salesforce on, which is actually quite interesting. They're the largest Power Mac customer in the world. Of course,
yeah,
Salesforce is running Oracle.
yeah,
They're not going to run all this in the Oracle cloud. So
yeah.
that's okay. There's those cases, and that was a really interesting case. And so I guess the point there is it's a big market.
Yeah, it's a big market, and some vendors cannot go with some vendors because of their collusion path, if you will. I remember Walmart coming to us when I was at Rackspace. We used to be number two cloud. I don't know if the viewers will believe me or not, but we were number two cloud for a while when we open source, OpenStack, and all that. They came to us, and of course, like, we knew why they're coming to us, this big company, right? Because they couldn't go to Amazon, right? Because they compete like this. Um, Target was another one. So yeah, those stories are there. Actually, the like market is so big that there's room for so many different vendors, and I think that the on-prem, we talk about this all the time. On-prem workloads are not going to cloud 100% anytime soon, and the sort of SIs are not sitting idle either, so they are preparing their managed services to do private clouds on whoever cooks up the best sort of private cloud, you know, uh, sort of recipe, if you will. They will hop onto that. We failed with OpenStack, but VMware and Red Hat, I think they are two vendors which are doing good on the software side of things when it comes to private clouds,
Yeah.
using Kubernetes or not using Kubernetes, regardless.
John's laying down some great comments there. And that was the other big theme of the show is edge. Now, I think of the edge. I think of the edge as AI inferencing in real time and streaming, and I think, we've talked about ARM and the presence it has and is going to further, and the cost advantages, what Tesla's doing. I think of that as, the true edge. Although there's that, near edge,
Yeah,
retail, telco, and that's kind of how where Dell's sweet spot is. They talked a lot about the edge at retail. We had an interview with the guy from Lowe's.
yeah,
Excellent interview. But at the end of the day, it was VX Rail enabling, a template to go out to whatever, hundreds and thousands of stores.
yeah,
So that's kind of enterprise at the edge versus a sort of a new model of computing at the edge that drives a ton of compute, creates a lot of data. I'm not sure how much of that data is going to be persisted, and I'm not sure how much is going to go back to the cloud, but it's probably plenty because there's just so much of it. But my thinking there is a new cost model is emerging right before our eyes, and it is being powered by the new semiconductor innovations that are occurring to support edge build outs. But again, it's a huge market. Those there's a lot of space for a company like Dell to go after.
yeah. As you said, that data at the edge, how much of that is exhaust? It just goes, like car exhaust. It just goes into air. Like it just you throw that away, and some of that will be kept at the edge only, and some will be sucked into the central place, like central places like cloud, right? The public cloud. And then I strongly believe that likes of Snowflake will repeat the same story like AWS and Azure has done. Like they started as public service, if you will, in a central thing, software as a service through public cloud consumption that way. But they will come to your data center. They have to if they want to keep growing. I think this was maybe one first step or first sort of inclination of that sort of trend that hey, you can do Snowflake kind of data democratization in your data center.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we know and what we don't know.
Hmm.
So we know that Snowflake and Dell did a partnership. We know that there's some engineering going on whereby you can access non-native Snowflake data that actually lives on-prem via a Dell object store using, I think, extended tables or materialized views. And you could
Yeah,
always do that in the cloud. In the data lake, you couldn't do it on-prem. So that's a first. It's available the second half of this year. And you can copy data back and forth. Now, what wasn't discussed was where's the compute for that?
yeah,
Um, is it going to be copied into the cloud and then the work gets done there and then copied back? Um, is Dell developing some kind of compute that can work in conjunction with Snowflake? Remember, Snowflake's advantage is separating compute from storage, unlimited scalability on both,
yeah,
and the ability to dial up or dial down that compute and the storage, of course, separately as required. So those details aren't available. I know in talking to John, he's like, Dave, this reminds me of uh, the VMware cloud on AWS,
yeah,
opening up the entire VMware customer base to Amazon. And we'll see as that renewal cycle comes through how much gets sucked into Amazon. But the flip side of that to me is what I was saying before is Dell has a huge customer base. There's tons of overlap with companies like Snowflake. And as it builds out its ecosystem for Apex, it can partner with companies like Snowflake. If I were Dell, I'd be running the table on database. I'd be doing the same similar things with Databricks and Mongo and Couchbase and Cloudera and so many others. Um, we all
yeah,
know because this is their cloud. Apex is their cloud. What did
yeah,
all the clouds guys do? Cloud guys all went hard after database. Every one
yeah,
of them.
yeah.
You know?
That's where every workload lands up being, right? So that's like a landfill of all,
Yeah.
everybody lands there at the end of the day. Like all the applications produce data and they consume data. So applications are important as well. And actually, on that note, I I spoke to John Siegel, Kanksha, I didn't write their last names. I just wrote it down. And
Marotra,
start with
Akanksha Marotra.
Malhotra, yes, and Varun Chabra,
Yeah.
and I was able to sit with them and get their sort of take on what they're trying to do. It was interesting um, to know from them where they're going, and the one thing I noticed that the Dell team is very humble and realistic in their narratives and messaging. They are not saying it's like unlike Oracle, like they say, "Oh, it's already there." It's not. No, no. They said we're working on it and we will let you know as we progress.
Yeah,
Right?
they're a transparent company. They are
Yeah.
very proud. Michael and their CFO Tom Sweet talk a lot about their say do ratio. They always get the math wrong. They always say we have a very high say do ratio. Like, no, you got a high do say ratio. But anyway, the math
Yeah.
guy in me. But yes, they are. I think a very humble company.
Yeah.
That comes from the top. Michael Dell is the consummate gentleman.
Yeah.
You just play nice and win. It's like the book says.
Yeah. I used to work at EMC and VMware as well. EMC, I loved Joe Tucci. His demeanor, he was like Michael Dell, right? So I think uh, the calm. Maybe you have a different opinion, but uh,
Yeah, I mean, I liked Tucci as well. I really enjoyed my time with Joe. I think it's just that Joe wasn't a founder, and
yeah,
Michael
yeah,
was. Let me put it that way.
Michael.
When
Yeah, yeah.
Joe was done, he was done.
Yeah. So actually, we'll wrap up quickly. Actually, when I was talking to these Dell folks, and I've spoken to some other folks at Google Cloud as well, and other vendors as well, is it's in the very preliminary sort of phases what I'm working on. I think we have to, as industry, we have to separate the sort of economics of creating software from economics of operating software, right? So I call it the creation economics and operations economics. So I think once we do that, our messaging from the likes of Dells and HPs and IBMs and Oracles will be little different. It will appeal to mature workloads, which are sort of more operational, because we tend to mix the the software creation part, and we tend to talk about developer productivity next to in the next sentence after we finish talking about the scale and or security and other things, right? So those things, though we want, it's our dream goal to have perfect DevOps practices, DevSecOps practices, and bring sec to the left towards the developers. But that the reality is it's not, right? So and we have so much legacy as well. I think that kind of sort of delineation can help us sort of wrap our head around the bigger problem of whole all stacks, if you will, from left to right, from creation to the operation side of things, and letting those systems go and retiring those in timely basis and all that stuff. By the way, a real quick note, actually, yesterday towards the end of the day, me and three, four other sort of analysts sat with the Dell Dell Tech, keep saying Dell CTO John Ruiz,
John
and
Rose. John
John
Rose.
Rose. Actually, I
Awesome. The guy's
missed.
awesome.
He
He's
is.
he's
Oh my
amazing.
God. I was talking to Anurag. It's like I have never seen anybody talk that fast for that long without a break and making 100% all sense all the time. Like when we talk fast and sometimes we mess up and we forget or something. You're like, oh my God. I was like, give us a pause. Let us talk a little bit. So he was going on and on. He was so that he's so passionate about the security side of things, and he was sharing some of Dell's thinking. I'm not allowed to say too much, but I'm allowed to say one thing, that Dell has this intention of leading the security standards discussions at the industry level, and I gave my 2 cents to them. I think the proper route is leveraging standards like SIM. CMDB had SIM standard. Like, how do you
Yeah.
describe something, right? And then CMDB is failed, but SIM standard is there. I think we can leverage that. And I also told that in the absence of having any standards, open source becomes standard, right? and that is another route. And the third route is working with other vendors who are very common vendors just to everybody else, like Intel, like Nvidia, like AMD, bringing them into the picture, because the security has to work from both, from we talked about this in that 1 hour meeting, hardware side and the software side, and how the open source is a sort of big, ticking time bomb, if you will, like we saw the log4j issue and other open source related issues. And actually White House even declared that open source is the one of the biggest national security threats. um, and John was saying that he's working very closely with the Washington, in and it's not he said it's not business driven sort of decision, but we know that it is always at the end of the day. But they want to play at the industry level by defining certain standards. He was mentioning zero trust, but I thought his understanding of zero trust was a little different than mine and a few others. But we will I think get those things hashed out. But I think look out for that stuff from Dell playing that role, or trying to play that role of a leader in the security space. Like, how do we secure our data?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think in talking to customers at the event and others, security was probably the number one theme. The cyber recovery vault that they announced
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
a service and doing that in the cloud, and that was, I think, really important. And I interviewed a customer, a CISO, who's using it, and so that was big news. Now it's interesting because Dell, EMC owned RSA, which was
Yeah.
obviously, a big player in security, but then that became legacy. Dell ends up selling that to help with the debt. They've got SecureWorks now. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I think their strategy is to sort of make all that stuff invisible and just show the customer solutions that are secure and explain why they're secure.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a good thing because it takes all that complexity and all those tools, out of the mix, and you're now buying solutions, which I think the industry needs. But that's real opportunity, growth opportunity for Dell. And I think there are two others, which is to create that self-service infrastructure, to your point, using APIs to be able to discover data, ideally leave data in place, and then the second piece of that is to share data in a federated governance model. And that's going to require software and standards to do that. And the lack of standards, maybe open source will be um, the norm, or Dell could create something like that. Or ideally, what I would love to see is Dell commits to open source capabilities and then optimizes its hardware to take advantage of those. I think that would give Dell a lot more credibility with developers, which it really doesn't have right now.
Yeah, the Dell's a proximity. I love the term, by the way, proximity. You must have heard me saying that 1,000 times.
Right.
And proximity and leverage are two key terms. I think that their proximity to developers is it's weak, and they want to improve that. I think, yeah, it was all over. I think it was interesting show. I kind of enjoyed it. I don't dwell that sort of go deep into the hardware side of things, even though I worked at EMC and VMware. It was purely software, but we knew what we can run on and all that stuff, like Intel and this and that. So that I have done a lot of data center audits, spanning million servers and all that stuff. But still, I'm a software guy at heart, and I wish Dell all the best to pull that off. And yeah, we always sort of root for the companies which are more transparent and hardworking. I think Dell is one of them.
Yeah, I enjoyed the event, and I go to a lot of events, as you know, but I always like Dell Tech World and VM World because I know a million people there, and it's like
Yeah, yeah.
the return of the gang. Um, but I thought the content was better than I'd ever seen before at any Dell event,
Hmm.
and I really liked how they sort of compressed the keynotes. I thought the demos were much more crisp. And I thought the themes were good. I think there were, some things that could have been improved. I didn't get as much connection to what was happening on the show floor. You took advantage of that early morning meeting. I didn't make it, walking the show floor, so I missed out on that. But I thought the ecosystem it's expanding. It's not just a
Yeah.
bunch of customers or partners reselling boxes anymore. It's people, customer companies adding value, becoming part of that Dell cloud. A lot of work to do, no doubt. And I think Dell knows that. To your point about them being, having humility.
Yeah, I think the one last thing is that the Michael Dell during the first day keynote mentioning that they will work closely with VMware and Red Hat. I think that was a calming kind of sort of statement, if you will, because if a vendor takes a turn, right, it can alienate some deals which are in the pipeline and or your existing relationships which you sell a lot of hardware through, right? Or it runs on top of Dell, so that can jeopardize that. And I think that was smart sort of move, and I hope they keep collaborating with them at deeper level, and not only them but also the likes of the HashiCorp. They mentioned Terraform and Ansible, stuff like that, which I love hearing. Actually, being coder, like I want everything to be like API driven and you can code to. So yeah, I think their journey has begun into this new world.
Yeah, one last comment is
Hmm.
you know Dell, again, very proud of their say do ratio. The one thing that I always have take a wait and see attitude toward, and you mentioned this with Red Hat. First of all, if Tanzu and Pivotal are your main options, you're limiting your market. So it's almost by necessity that they have to work with Red Hat. OpenShift is get strong momentum with developers, and Dell will say the right things. They certainly said those things with Nutanix.
Yes.
They certainly said those things with Cisco, and so we sort of know where those relationships went. So we watch, we'll see. I mean, they send the right message to customers because they have joint customers, but I hope they do lean into Red Hat. It's an important part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and on M&A side, actually, I always think that uh, HashiCorp is a hot property for anybody who wants to multi-cloud, and yeah, it's
I was, I agree with you, John. I don't know if he's still on, but John was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure." I was thinking, hey, partner with Hashi, maybe even buy them. John
yeah,
was
it's
poo-pooing
cheap.
that. I thought so. I thought it would be a key aspect of multi-cloud, the connection points across cloud, the automation. But John was not a fan of that scenario, so we'll have to have him on and ask him why.
Yeah, we should talk to him sometime. Yeah, cool. Thank you, Dave, for finding some time. And I wanted to. I thought I will end up doing this solo, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My
Like it was
pleasure.
good
I'm
seeing you
so
there.
glad you invited me because I never would have been able to do this in the next several weeks because we're just on the road. It's fresh in our heads. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks. We'll end it here, guys. For sorry if you have typed in some comments on online, we couldn't get to it. It's live. I could tell you what exactly time it is, like 2:10 right now, and I can tell you where the Dow closed. It's not recorded, and you guys all know that the event just ended last night, and we just got home. So thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. We're gonna end it here.